Well, it's a little drizzly day out here today. Weather's not that great. It's going to rain all day, but I thought I'd take a chance and get out here a little bit before it started raining and talk to you a little bit today about some church history. And I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the key things that happened in the early church from kind of John the Baptist side. And I'm just going to highlight it. And then in further episodes, we'll kind of go into more detail and talk more about the specifics. Mostly what I want to get to at some point is the understanding of how our doctrinal beliefs in the church kind of developed over time, because they weren't always seen in the same light that we have today 2,000 years later. And there was a number of fights and different things that happened within the church that kind of settled issues, and we came up with some common doctrine. So I just want to highlight a few things that kind of happened and talk about a few of the martyrs, and then a couple of the martyrs we'll get into a little bit later on because they have a significant role to play in the early church. And so I want to begin and kind of give you a timeline of when things happened. So John the Baptist ministry started in 27 AD, which is just right around the time that just before Jesus starts his ministry. And then in 30 AD, Jesus is crucified and resurrected and ascends into heaven. Stephen gets martyred in about 35 AD, and that's the same year that Paul's converted. And if you remember, it was Paul watching Stephen's death, his martyrdom, that really had an effect in Paul and ultimately led to his conversion. Of course, we know Paul was kind of knocked off that donkey and Christ spoke to him and all of that. But it was Stephen that kind of set all of that in motion. And then in AD 44, James, the son of Zebedee, was martyred by King Herod Agrippa. Paul's first mission trip takes place in AD 47. And then his second trip is the following year in 48, 49. The Jews get expelled from Rome. And we're going to talk about that a lot later on, because the whole book of Romans was written in regards to this expulsion of the Jews from the city of Rome, and then their allowance back into Rome. And then Paul begins to address the issues in the church. And that's what happens in that. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Then Paul goes on another missions trip in AD 53. And from 53 to 57, he does his third trip. Andrew is martyred in AD 60. And then Nero launches a persecution where Peter is martyred in that persecution. And so there's a lot of stuff going on there. And then an emperor named Domitian develops a form of emperor worship and demands it on all the people. And that really sets the stage for some opposition and stuff going on. And in AD 95, he executes or exiles several family members, accusing them of atheism. Timothy is finally killed in AD 97. And then in AD 100, John the Apostle dies. He's the last remaining apostle that's alive at this point of time. In AD 107, Simon, cousin of Jesus and Bishop of Jerusalem, is killed for anti-Semitic reasons. 110 AD, Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, is martyred in Rome. 155 AD, Polycarp is martyred. And Polycarp is someone we really want to talk about later on. He's an extraordinary man. Also, he was the last disciple of John the Apostle after he got out of the Isle of Patmos. Justin's martyred in 165 AD. And then Tertullian writes his thesis, or apology is called, in 197. Tertullian has a great effect on the early church. In 2002, Emperor Severus forbids conversions to Christianity. In 2003, Origen's father and mother are martyred along with a bunch of others. And Origen also has a great contribution into the doctrines of our church today. In 211 to 213, there's African hostilities. In 235, Emperor Maximum Thrax persecutes church leaders, including Hippopolus, who's also another major figure in the early church. In 248, Origen writes his Against Celsus persecutions in Alexandria. And then in 250, Emperor Decius orders universal sacrifice. Church leaders are arrested, Origen's jailed and tortured. Pope Fabian is martyred, as are bishops of Antioch and Jerusalem, and other bishops in the land. They all flee and get out of town because it's getting crazy, because this emperor is just going after everyone that doesn't fall down and worship him. In 254, Origen finally dies from being tortured. And then another emperor comes on the scene, Valerian, in 257. He rules for just a few years, and he begins to persecute all the clergy. In 261, another emperor, Gallienus, issues a redescript ordering toleration. So now we're starting to get a little bit of they're starting to accept the church a little bit. In 270 AD, another emperor establishes the state cult of unconquerable sun, where they begin to worship the sun, and he threatens persecution. And then he forces all Christians in the army to resign. He didn't want any Christians in his army at all. And then in 303 AD, the Great Persecution begins, and 4 edicts call for the church's buildings to all be destroyed, all the sacred writings to be burned. Christians lose all their civil rights, and clergy is to be imprisoned and forced to sacrifice. And if they don't sacrifice, they'll be put to death. And they have to have a certificate proving that they sacrifice. So they're giving these certificates and decrees that they have to sacrifice. And so this is just kind of a quick overview, and then in our next session we're going to get into kind of some things with the early church and the first council that happened in 48 AD, where the church leaders decided they needed to deal with this influx of the Gentiles into the church and how they're going to react and what they're going to require of them. Because remember, the Gentiles are not following the Mosaic laws and rituals in regards to the way you wash your hands, what foods you can eat, what foods you can't eat. And so they have a council to determine kind of what's going on with that. And that's kind of what happens. And we're going to leave it there, and then we'll get back with the next section of this in just a little bit.